The westbound train's whistles shrieked across the Colorado Territory, like a dying animal, its black smoke choking the afternoon sky above Dusty Bend Depot. As the locomotive's thunder faded into the distance, a figure collapsed onto the sun-bleached wooden planks, a young Chinese woman, her blue cotton dress torn and stained with blood, her swollen belly marking her 7 months with child. Mei Lin gasped, her delicate fingers clawing at the splintered wood as she tried to rise. The gathered crowd stepped back, their faces twisting with disgust and something hungrier. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts, while men leaned forward, eager for spectacle. A glob of tobacco juice splattered near her head, followed by nervous laughter from the back of the crowd. Doyle's yellow whore, someone spat. Look at the state of her. Others murmured agreement, their voices carrying the cruel satisfaction of people who had found someone lower than themselves to despise. Mrs. Garrett whispered something to her neighbor, shaking her head with practiced righteousness. Old Pete from the livery stable hawked and spat again, his weathered face creased with contempt. Sheriff Lyle Brennan pushed through the crowd, like a man parting tall grass, his badge catching the harsh sunlight. A big man with cold gray eyes and a mouth that rarely smiled, he looked down at the collapsed woman with the same expression he might reserve for a rabid dog. Well, well, seems our little songbird finally tried to fly the coop. The crowd murmured its approval, feeding on the sheriff's contempt like vultures on carrion. Mei Lin's chest heaved as she struggled to breathe, her dark eyes wide with terror as she searched the hostile faces surrounding her. Something deep in her belly twisted, not just fear, but the first stirrings of labor brought on by trauma and desperation. She's Doyle's saloon trash. Lyle continued, his voice carrying easily across the depot. Let her rot where she fell. Ain't no business of ours what happens to stolen goods. That's when Coda Standing Bear stepped forward. The Comanche scout moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his weathered leather boots making no sound on the wooden planks. The crowd parted reluctantly, their jeers dying in their throats as they recognized the quiet menace in his approach. At 28, Coda carried himself with the dignity of a man who had survived what others had not. But beneath his calm exterior, rage burned like a banked fire. He had seen too much suffering endured, too many injustices to stand by and watch another innocent soul be destroyed by the cruelty of so-called civilized men. The woman's condition stirred something deeper than sympathy in him. A memory of his own mother's final days, when she had struggled to bring his younger sister into a world that had already decided both of them were worthless. The sight of blood on Mei Lin's dress, the way she cradled her swollen belly protectively, triggered an oath he had made over his mother's grave. Never again would he stand silent while the strong preyed upon the helpless. She's carrying a child, Coda said quietly, his voice cutting through the desert heat like a blade. Sheriff Lyle's hand drifted toward his gun fingers, twitching with the kind of nervous energy that came from having his authority questioned in public. Walk away, Breed. This ain't your concern. But Coda was already kneeling beside Mei Lin, his calloused hands gentle as he checked her pulse. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his, and in that moment, something passed between them. Recognition of shared suffering, perhaps, or simply the desperate gratitude of one lost soul reaching out to another. Her lips moved, forming silent words in Chinese that he couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear enough. Help me. Save my baby. The air around Dusty Bend Depot choked with dust, heat, and the promise of violence. In the distance, a hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing across the wasteland like a warning of storms to come. Mei Lin Chen had been 19 when the men came to her village outside Canton, speaking of golden opportunities across the ocean in the land of the Gold Mountain. She had been 19 when she learned that promises made by strangers in fine clothes are often lies wrapped in silk and sealed with false smiles. Now at 20, she knew the weight of chains, even when they couldn't be seen. For 13 months, she had been property of Doyle's saloon, a squat building of warped wood and broken dreams that sat like a festering wound on Dusty Bend's main street. Thomas Doyle, a soft-bellied man with hard eyes and harder fists, had purchased her contract from the railroad company, along with 3 other girls, treating them like livestock to be worked until they broke. The beatings came when business was slow. The other things came when business was good. But Mei Lin had learned something in those dark months that her captors didn't suspect: patience and the art of observation. She had watched and listened, cataloging the routines of her captors, memorizing the faces of the men who came and went, learning to read the subtle signs that meant danger or opportunity. Her grandmother had taught her that a woman's greatest weapon was not her beauty or her submission, but her mind. Even in the worst moments, Mei Lin had kept that lesson close to her heart, storing away every scrap of information that might someday prove useful. 7 months ago, everything had changed when Marcus Reed began visiting the saloon. Unlike the others, he spoke to her as if she were human, bringing small gifts, a piece of hard candy, a wildflower pressed between pages of a discarded book, once even a small mirror, so she could see her own face without the bruises. For 3 precious weeks, she had dared to hope that freedom might be possible. Then Marcus had vanished, and with him her dreams of escape. But she had learned something valuable from their brief time together: that not all white men were monsters, and that even in the darkest places, kindness could bloom like a desert flower after rain. The baby growing inside her was Marcus's child, conceived in love rather than violence. Doyle claimed otherwise, but Mei Lin knew her own body knew the difference between what was taken and what was given freely. She would protect this child with her life, even if it meant facing down every devil in hell. Coda Standing Bear understood loss in ways most men never would. He had been 12 when the blue-coated soldiers came to his village speaking of peace, while their guns remained loaded and their eyes held the cold light of men who had already decided who would live and who would die. He had watched his father, War Eagle, die with dignity intact, refusing to beg for mercy that would never come. But it was his mother's death that had shaped him most profoundly. Gentle Rain had survived the initial massacre, had endured the forced march to the reservation, had even found the strength to give birth to Coda's sister in that hellish place. But the reservation doctors had refused to help a squaw in labor, and both mother and child had died within hours of each other. Coda had been 17, then old enough to understand that his mother's death was not a tragedy, but a crime, a deliberate act of cruelty disguised as policy. He had sworn over her grave that he would never again stand silent while the powerful destroyed the innocent. Now he lived on the outskirts of Dusty Bend, in a one-room cabin that leaked when it rained and froze when it snowed. But he had learned to read the signs that others missed: the way tracks told stories, the way shadows moved differently when men were hiding secrets, the way a town's rhythm changed when corruption ran deep. He had noticed things about Dusty Bend that troubled him. The way certain men never seemed to work but always had money. The way girls disappeared from Doyle's saloon and were never seen again. The way Sheriff Brennan's wealth seemed to grow faster than his salary could account for. Most disturbing of all were the strangers who came through town. Men who spoke quietly with Doyle and left quickly, men who dressed better than they should and asked questions about things that weren't their business. Coda had developed a sense for dangerous men, and these visitors set every instinct he possessed screaming warnings. The townspeople tolerated Coda because he was useful. He could track animals, or men with equal skill could read the desert's moods like other men read newspapers, could break horses that no one else could touch. But tolerance was not acceptance, and he had learned to walk the narrow line between survival and surrender. Sheriff Lyle Brennan and his younger brother, Deputy Jess, ruled Dusty Bend with an iron fist wrapped in legal authority. Lyle was the hammer, quick to violence and slow to mercy, a man who had built his reputation on fear. Jess was supposed to be the softer touch, the voice of reason. But Coda had noticed things about the younger Brennan that others missed. The way Jess's hands shook when he visited the saloon. The way his eyes followed Mei Lin with something more than casual interest. The way he found excuses to walk past Doyle's establishment at times when she might be visible through the windows. What most people didn't know was that the Brennan brothers had a silent partner in their empire of corruption, Mr. Williamson the banker, a thin man with calculating eyes who financed their operations while maintaining the facade of respectability. Williamson held the mortgages on half the buildings in town, and he had been asking very pointed questions about Doyle's business arrangements lately. As Coda helped Mei Lin to her feet, her legs trembling with exhaustion, and the first contractions of premature labor, he caught sight of Jess Brennan standing at the edge of the crowd. The deputy's young face was pale, his hand resting on his gun, not in threat, but in nervous habit. For just a moment their eyes met, and Coda saw something there that made his blood run cold. Not guilt or regret, but the desperate panic of a man whose secrets were about to be exposed. Then Lyle's voice cut through the moment like a bullwhip cracking in the desert air. I said, "Walk away, Breed. Don't make me repeat myself." The crowd pressed closer, sensing violence in the air, like animals sensing a storm. Mei Lin's hand found Coda's arm, her grip surprisingly strong, for someone so frail. She whispered something in Chinese, then in broken English. "Please, my baby." Coda looked into her eyes and saw not just fear, but a fierce determination that reminded him of his own mother's final moments. In that instant, he made a choice that would change everything. "You want to stop me, Sheriff?" Coda said quietly, his voice carrying despite its low tone. "Then you'll have to go through me." The desert wind picked up, stirring the dust around their feet like a living thing. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled its voice, lonely and defiant, against the coming darkness. And in the hills above town, two riders sat their horses in the shade of a boulder, watching the scene unfold through field glasses and speaking in the clipped tones of men who had found what they were looking for. The metallic click of Lyle's gun clearing its holster cut through the desert air like a death knell. The sheriff's Colt .45 gleamed in the afternoon sun, its barrel steady despite the tremor of rage running through his body. The crowd instinctively stepped back, forming a loose circle around the three figures, the lawman, the scout, and the fallen woman. "You got about 10 seconds to let go of that whore and step away." Lyle growled, his finger caressing the trigger with the familiarity of long practice. "After that, I'll be well within my rights to put you down like the dog you are." Mei Lin whimpered, her hands instinctively covering her swollen belly as another contraction hit her. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled, sending her back to her knees on the rough wooden planks. Blood soaked through her dress, and she could feel the baby moving restlessly inside her, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them both. Coda didn't move. Instead, he shifted his position slightly, placing himself more firmly between Mei Lin and the sheriff's gun. His own weapon remained holstered, but his hands hung loose at his sides, ready to move if needed. He had learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous thing a man could do was appear helpless when he was anything but. "You'd shoot a woman carrying a child?" Coda asked, his voice calm, despite the tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. In front of this whole town? The question hung in the desert heat like smoke. Several townspeople shifted uncomfortably, their bloodlust tempered by the stark reality of what they were witnessing. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, her face pale beneath her sunbonnet. Even some of the rougher men seemed uncertain, their earlier enthusiasm for violence cooling under the weight of moral consequence. But others leaned forward with hungry eyes, eager to see blood spilled. The Garrett boys whooped and hollered, treating the confrontation like entertainment. Pete Malloy from the saloon called out, "Shoot 'em both, Sheriff, save us all some trouble." Lyle's face flushed red above his beard. "That ain't no woman that's stolen property, and you know it. Doyle's got papers on her, legal and binding. You're interfering with lawful recovery of goods. Papers don't make her less human." Coda replied, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "And that child she's carrying didn't choose to be born into this world. What kind of man punishes an innocent baby for the sins of others?" The crowd murmured uneasily. In the harsh frontier territory, children were precious regardless of their parentage or the circumstances of their conception. Too many babies died in the desert heat or winter cold for anyone to take their lives lightly. Deputy Jess Brennan stepped forward, his hand on his own weapon, but not drawing it. His young face was tight with an emotion Coda couldn't quite read. Fear, certainly, but something else beneath it. Lyle, maybe we should— Shut up, Jess. Lyle's voice cracked like a whip. I'm handling this. The sheriff's attention flickered to his brother for just a moment, but it was enough. Coda saw the uncertainty in Jess's eyes, the way the younger man's gaze kept drifting to Mei Lin's face, the way his breathing had become shallow and rapid. There was something there, some connection that ran deeper than professional duty. Last warning, breed. Lyle snarled, swinging his gun back toward Coda. Step away, or I'll drop you where you stand. Coda looked down at Mei Lin, who was watching him with desperate hope. Her lips were moving silently, and he realized she was praying, whether in Chinese or English, he couldn't tell. But the words carried the same weight in any language. She was asking whatever gods might be listening to protect her unborn child, even if they couldn't protect her. What's it going to be? Lyle demanded. Coda's answer came not in words, but in action. He bent down and carefully lifted Mei Lin in his arms, her slight weight feeling fragile against his chest. She was burning with fever, her skin slick with sweat, but she managed to loop her arms around his neck. No, she whispered in English, her voice barely audible. Too dangerous. Sometimes dangerous is the only choice left. Coda murmured back. Lyle's gun barked, the sound echoing off the depot's walls like thunder rolling across the desert. The bullet tore through Coda's left shoulder, spinning him partially around and sending fresh blood streaming down his shirt. But he managed to keep his grip on Mei Lin, his muscles locked with determination and adrenaline. The crowd erupted in chaos. Women screamed, children cried, and men shouted conflicting orders. Mrs. Henderson fainted, her body hitting the ground with a dull thud. Even some of the rougher men looked shocked, one thing to threaten violence, another to actually spill blood in broad daylight. Jesus Christ, Lyle. Dr. Matthews called out from the back of the crowd. What the hell's wrong with you? But the sheriff was beyond reason now, his face twisted with rage and something deeper, of the desperate fury of a man whose carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. His authority had been challenged in public, and he would not tolerate it. "The next one goes through your heart, breed." He snarled, his gun tracking Coda's movement. "I swear it on my mother's grave." Coda straightened his left arm, hanging useless at his side, but his right still supporting Mei Lin. Blood dripped steadily onto the wooden planks, but his voice remained steady. "Then you better make it count, Sheriff. Because if you don't kill me, I'm walking out of here with her." The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would break first. In the distance, those two riders on the hill began moving down toward town. But nobody noticed them yet. All attention was focused on the deadly confrontation unfolding at the depot. Then Coda began to walk. Each step sent fire through his wounded shoulder, but he kept moving, carrying Mei Lin toward the edge of the crowd. The townspeople parted reluctantly, their faces a mixture of fascination and horror. Some reached out as if to help, then pulled their hands back, unwilling to risk Lyle's wrath. "Stop!" Lyle roared, his gun tracking Coda's movement. "I'll kill you both." But he didn't pull the trigger. Whether it was the shocked faces of his constituents or some last vestige of conscience, something held him back. The women in the crowd were weeping now, and even some of the men looked sick at what they were witnessing. Coda reached the edge of the crowd and kept walking, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each determined step. Behind him, he heard Lyle's voice rising in frustrated rage. $20 bounty for whoever brings them back, dead or alive. I don't care which. The words followed them into the desert heat, but Coda didn't look back. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back now. Ahead lay the abandoned mission church, its bell tower visible against the blue sky like a promise of sanctuary. Mei Lin's fever-bright eyes met his. "Why?" she whispered. "Because it's right," he said simply. Behind them, Dusty Bend's main street buzzed with activity as men began gathering weapons and supplies. The hunt was about to begin. But what none of them knew was that they weren't the only ones hunting. The two riders from the hills had reached the outskirts of town, and they were asking pointed questions about a Chinese girl and her unborn child, questions that suggested Mei Lin's past was about to catch up with her in ways that Sheriff Brennan couldn't imagine. The mission church of San Miguel had been abandoned for 3 years, its congregation scattered by disease, drought, and the general despair that seemed to follow civilization's advance across the territory. The wooden cross atop its bell tower leaned at a precarious angle, and weeds grew through cracks in the stone foundation. But beneath the rotting floorboards lay something most people had forgotten. A storm cellar dug by the original Spanish missionaries. Coda had discovered it 2 winters ago while seeking shelter from a blizzard, and now it might be their salvation. Mei Lin had lost consciousness during the half-mile walk from the depot, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion and fever. Coda's wounded shoulder screamed with each step, but he forced himself to remain alert. By the time he reached the mission, his vision was blurring, but he could hear the sound of pursuit growing closer. He kicked open the church's front door and descended into the cellar's cool darkness. The underground chamber was small, but secure, its walls lined with stone. Someone had stored supplies here, a few rusted cans, a moth-eaten blanket, and a small cache of candles and matches wrapped in oilcloth. Coda laid Mei Lin on the blanket, her pale face ghostly in the flickering candlelight. She stirred as he bound his shoulder with strips torn from his shirt, her eyes opening to take in their surroundings. "Where?" she whispered. "Safe for now," Coda replied. "How do you feel?" Mei Lin tried to sit up, then gasped and pressed both hands to her belly. "The baby, something's wrong." Her words were cut off by a contraction that made her double over in pain. Coda's blood ran cold. The stress and trauma had triggered premature labor, and they were trapped underground with no medical supplies. "How long have the pains been coming?" "Since this morning," Mei Lin managed between gritted teeth. "But they're getting stronger." Above them, the sound of hoofbeats filled the air. Lyle's posse had arrived at the mission, and they were searching the grounds with systematic thoroughness. "Sheriff's offering $20 for the breed and the whore," a voice called out. "Search every building." Footsteps echoed through the church above. Coda blew out the candle, plunging them into darkness, and drew his knife. If they were found, he would make their captors pay dearly. Mei Lin's hand found his wrist. "If they take me," she whispered, "promise me you'll try to save my baby." "They're not taking you," Coda replied firmly. "Either of you." Another contraction hit her, and she bit down on her knuckle to keep from crying out. Blood seeped between her fingers, but she didn't make a sound. In that moment, Coda saw the same fierce determination that had kept his own people alive through centuries of hardship. The searchers spent nearly an hour in the church, their voices growing increasingly frustrated. Finally, the sounds faded as they moved on to other buildings. But Coda knew they would be back. "We can't stay here long," he said, lighting the candle again. "They'll figure out there's a cellar eventually." Mei Lin nodded weakly. "The baby's coming whether we're ready or not." Coda had helped deliver foals and calves, but human birth was different, more dangerous. Without proper supplies, both mother and child could easily die. "There's someone who might help. Abel Morales, the undertaker. He's got medical training and he's never been friendly with the sheriff. Do you trust him?" Coda considered the question. Abel was a quiet man who treated everyone with the same grim courtesy regardless of their race. He had served as the town's unofficial doctor when needed, and he had never asked questions about the bodies he prepared for burial. "As much as I can trust anyone in this town," Coda answered honestly. Mei Lin's contractions were coming every few minutes now, each one stronger than the last. Time was running out. "I'm going to get help," he said. "Lock the trapdoor behind me and don't open it for anyone but me." "What if you don't come back?" Coda met her eyes in the candlelight. "Then you do whatever you have to do to keep that baby alive. Promise me." She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I promise." As Coda climbed back up to the church's main floor, he could hear Mei Lin's labored breathing echoing from below. The contractions were getting stronger, and she was running out of time to stay quiet. The night air was cool against his face as he slipped out of the mission. In the distance, torches flickered throughout Dusty Bend as the manhunt continued. $20 was more money than most people in town saw in a month. But as Coda made his way toward Abel's funeral parlor, he couldn't shake the feeling that something else was hunting them, something more dangerous than Sheriff Brennan's wounded pride. The two riders he had glimpsed earlier were still out there somewhere, and men like that didn't give up easily. Behind him, the mission church stood silent and dark, its secrets hidden beneath layers of dust and decay. In the cellar below, a young woman fought to bring new life into a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty, while above forces beyond her imagination were converging on her location. The hunt was far from over, and the worst was yet to come. The funeral parlor sat at the edge of Dusty Bend, like a tombstone marking the boundary between civilization and the wild. Abel Morales had built it himself using lumber salvaged from a train wreck and nails straightened from bent horseshoes. It wasn't pretty, but it was solid. Coda found Abel in his workroom preparing the body of a drifter who had died of consumption earlier that day. The undertaker looked up as Coda slipped through the back door, his weathered face showing no surprise. "Unheard there was some excitement at the depot today," Abel said calmly in his accent, touched English, continuing his work. "Heard you got yourself shot, amigo." "Nothing I can't handle," Coda replied, though his shoulder throbbed. "I need help, Abel. Medical help." The older man set down his tools and studied Coda with intelligent brown eyes. "This about the Chinese girl?" Coda nodded. "She's having the baby, early because of the stress. I need supplies, clean cloths, medicine, anything you can spare." Abel was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the sound of horses and shouting voices drifted through the night air. $20 is a lot of money, you know. You thinking of collecting? I'm thinking of staying alive long enough to spend it." Abel moved to a cabinet and began pulling out supplies, clean linen, a bottle of laudanum surgical instruments wrapped in oiled leather. "Where is she?" "Somewhere safe, for now." Abel nodded, understanding the need for secrecy. "How long between contractions?" "Getting close, maybe every few minutes." The undertaker's face grew grim. "First baby?" "I think so. Then we might have time, but not much. And if there are complications..." He didn't finish the sentence, but Coda understood. As Abel packed the supplies into a leather satchel, the funeral parlor's front door exploded inward. Deputy Jess Brennan stood in the doorway, his gun drawn, and his young face twisted with conflicting emotions. "Where is she?" Jess demanded, his voice shaking with intensity. Coda's hand moved to his weapon, but Abel stepped between them. "Easy, deputy. No one here but us dead folks. Don't lie to me, Abel. I know he's been here." Jess's gun swung toward Coda, but his aim was unsteady. "Tell me where she is, or I swear I'll..." "You'll what?" Coda interrupted. "Shoot me like your brother did." Something flickered in Jess's eyes, guilt, fear, or something deeper. "Mei Lin," he whispered, and the name fell from his lips like a prayer. "Is she hurt? Is the baby..." He stopped himself, but it was too late. Both Coda and Abel had heard the raw emotion in his voice, the desperate concern that went far beyond professional duty. "Adios mio," Abel breathed. "You're the father." Jess's face went white, but he didn't deny it. Instead, his gun hand began to shake visibly, and tears started streaming down his cheeks. "I tried to protect her. I tried, but Lyle, he knows. He's always known. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Jess had been visiting Doyle's saloon, but not for the usual reasons. He had fallen in love with one of the girls, and she had fallen in love with him. But in a town where such relationships were potentially deadly, they had been forced to keep their affair secret. The railroad worker, Coda, said slowly, "Marcus Reed." What really happened to him? Jess's face crumpled. He was getting too close to the truth. Lyle said he was a threat to the family reputation. Said he had to be dealt with. And you let him die. I didn't know. Jess exploded. I thought they were just going to run him out of town. By the time I realized what Lyle was planning, it was too late. Marcus was already dead. Abel shook his head in disgust. So you let an innocent man die and an innocent woman suffer for your cowardice. I was trying to protect her. If Lyle knew the baby was mine, he'd kill us both. Some protection, Coda said bitterly. Doyle was planning to sell the baby to slavers. Did you know that? The deputy's face went even paler. No, I swear I didn't know. His words were cut off by the sound of approaching horses. Through the window, they could see torches moving through the darkness. Lyle's voice carried on the night air. Search every building again. They're here somewhere. Jess holstered his gun and turned toward the door. I'll try to lead them away. No. Coda interrupted. You've done enough damage. Stay here and keep quiet. But as Coda reached for the door, Jess grabbed his arm. Please, just tell me, is she all right? Is the baby? She's in labor, Coda said bluntly. Probably because of the stress your brother put her through. If she dies, it's on you. The words hit Jess like physical blows, but Coda didn't care. He had no patience for the deputy's guilt or self-pity. What mattered now was getting back to Mei Lin before it was too late. As he slipped out the back door with Abel's medical supplies, Coda could hear Jess weeping in the darkness behind him. The sound followed him into the night, but he pushed it from his mind. The mission church loomed ahead, its bell tower, a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. From the cellar below came the sound of muffled cries. Mei Lin was trying to stay quiet, but the pain was overwhelming her self-control. The baby was coming ready or not. But as Coda descended into the hidden chamber, he found more than just a woman in labor waiting for him. Two men stood in the shadows at the edge of the candlelight, hard-faced strangers, with guns in their hands and cold calculation in their eyes. Well, well. One of them said, his voice carrying the flat accent of the eastern cities. Looks like we found our little runaway. The two strangers emerged from the shadows, like wolves materializing from darkness. They were professional men, not the crude bounty hunters or drunken cowboys who usually populated frontier towns, but something far more dangerous. The taller one, lean and sharp-featured with pale eyes, kept his gun trained on Coda, while his companion, a thick-set man with scarred knuckles, stood over Mei Lin. Easy now, friend. The tall one said, his voice educated but cold. No need for anyone to get hurt. We're just here to collect what belongs to our employer. Coda's hand froze halfway to his weapon. She doesn't belong to anyone. The scarred man laughed harshly. That's where you're wrong, Breed. This little yellow bird here owes a considerable debt to some very important people back in San Francisco. People who don't like it when their property goes missing. Mei Lin whimpered, pressing herself back against the cellar wall despite the contraction racking her body. No, she whispered. I paid. I paid everything. Your passage, maybe, the tall man said with false gentleness. But not the interest, not the penalty for running away, and certainly not the additional fees for the trouble you've caused us. Coda's mind raced. These weren't Sheriff Brennan's men, and they were representatives of the criminal network that had brought Mei Lin to America in the first place. The Tong. Yeah, very good. The tall man replied to Coda's recognition. though we prefer to think of ourselves as businessmen. We provide services, and we expect our debts to be paid in full. What do you want? Coda asked, though he already suspected the answer. The girl and the baby when it's born. Our employer has a buyer lined up, someone who pays very well for young mothers and their children. The work is specialized. Coda felt his blood turn to ice. These men represented something far worse than Doyle's saloon or even Sheriff Brennan's cruelty. They were part of a vast network that traded in human lives across the continent. She's in labor, Coda said, trying to buy time. She needs help. All the better, the scarred man replied with a cruel smile. Fresh inventory is always worth more. And a baby with mixed blood, there are collectors who pay premium prices. Mei Lin's scream of pain cut through the cellar like a knife. The contraction was stronger now, and blood was soaking through her dress. If she didn't get medical attention soon, both she and the baby would die. Let me help her, Coda said. Then we'll talk. The tall man considered this, then nodded to his companion. Do it. But if anyone tries anything clever, the breed dies first. Coda moved carefully to Mei Lin's side, setting down Abel's medical supplies. Her face was pale with pain and fear. But when she looked at him, he saw something else, a fierce determination that reminded him of his own mother's final moments. The baby's coming fast, he whispered. Too fast. Above them, the sounds of Lyle's search party grew closer. Boots stomped across the church floor, accompanied by frustrated voices. They hadn't found the cellar yet, but it was only a matter of time. Seems like you've got other problems, the tall man observed. Local law enforcement from the sound of it. The sheriff's offering a bounty, Coda replied. $20 for her capture. $20. The scarred man laughed. We're talking about 10 times that amount minimum. Your local sheriff is small time. But their conversation was interrupted by Mei Lin's agonized cry. The baby was coming now, whether they were ready or not. Coda worked frantically with Abel's limited supplies, trying to make the birth as safe as possible under impossible circumstances. It's a girl, he announced softly as he lifted the tiny blood-covered infant. She's small, but she's breathing. The baby's cry filled the cellar, thin and reedy, but unmistakably alive. For a moment, even the hardened criminals seemed affected by the miracle of new life. But the moment was shattered by the sound of splintering wood above. Someone had found the trapdoor. Down here, a voice shouted. I found them. Everything happened at once. The cellar filled with armed men as Lyle's posse poured through the trapdoor. Guns were drawn, curses flew, and in the chaos, the two Tong representatives found themselves face to face with local law enforcement. What the hell is this? Lyle Brennan demanded as he descended into the cellar, his gun drawn and his face flushed with triumph and confusion. The tall stranger stepped forward with professional calm. Sheriff Brennan, I presume Agent Morrison with the federal government. We're conducting an investigation into human trafficking networks. It was a lie smoothly delivered, but Lyle was too focused on his quarry to question it closely. I don't care if you're President Grant himself. That woman is my prisoner. I'm afraid that's not possible, the tall man replied. This woman is a federal witness under our protection. But as the standoff developed, Coda noticed something that chilled his blood. The scarred Tong enforcer was positioning himself behind Lyle's men, his hand moving slowly toward a hidden weapon. The criminal had realized that the sheriff's arrival was actually an opportunity. In the chaos, he could eliminate everyone who knew about their operation. That's when Deputy Jess appeared at the top of the trap door, his face twisted with anguish. Lyle, stop this. That's my child down there. The confession hit the crowded cellar like a thunderbolt. Lyle spun toward his brother, his face contorting with rage and betrayal. What did you say? The baby is mine. Jess repeated, his voice growing stronger. Mei Lin and I love each other. and I won't let you hurt our daughter." For a moment, it seemed like the situation might resolve itself through family confrontation. But then Lyle's face changed, and Coda realized with horror that the sheriff already knew about his brother's relationship. "You think I didn't know?" Lyle snarled. "You think I haven't been watching you moon over that Chinese whore for months? You think I didn't arrange for Marcus Reed to disappear when he got too close to the truth?" The revelation hit Jess like a physical blow. You knew all this time." "I knew, and I had a plan to fix it. Our friend Mr. Williamson arranged for some business associates from San Francisco to take care of the problem permanently. Clean, profitable, and nobody asks questions." Coda's blood ran cold as he realized the truth. Lyle hadn't just been working with the bank to launder money, he had been collaborating with the Tong to eliminate evidence of his brother's indiscretions. The trafficking network, the corruption, the murdered railroad worker, it all led back to the sheriff's obsession with maintaining his family's reputation. "You sold her to them," Jess whispered in horror. "Your own nephew's mother." "I sold a problem to people who solve problems," Lyle replied coldly. "Just like I'm going to solve you." The sheriff's gun swung toward his brother, but the scarred Tong enforcer moved first. His hidden blade flashed in the candlelight as he lunged for Mei Lin, intending to silence the only witness who could connect his organization to the sheriff's corruption. Coda threw himself between the attacker and the new mother, taking the knife in his ribs instead of letting it find its intended target. They went down together, grappling in the confined space as blood poured from Coda's wound. The cellar erupted into violence. Guns fired in the confined space, filling the air with smoke and screams. Men shouted conflicting orders as they struggled to tell friend from foe in the chaos. In the melee, Jess shot his own brother. The bullet took Lyle in the chest, driving him back against the stone wall. The sheriff stared at his younger brother with shock and betrayal, blood foaming on his lips. Jess," he whispered, "you killed me." "You destroyed yourself," Jess replied, tears streaming down his face. "The day you decided family didn't matter." But the violence wasn't over. The tall Tong agent, seeing his partner down and the situation spiraling out of control, made a desperate grab for the baby. If he couldn't complete his original mission, he would at least salvage something valuable from the wreckage. That's when Mrs. Henderson surprised everyone. The banker's wife had followed the search party to the church, driven by maternal instinct and moral outrage. Now she stood at the top of the trapdoor with a shotgun in her hands, her face set with righteous fury. "All right. You touch that baby, and I'll send you straight to hell," she declared, her voice carrying the authority of outraged motherhood. Behind her stood other women from the town, Sarah Mitchell, the schoolteacher, Mary Sullivan from the general store, even some of the wives of men who had been calling for Mei Lin's blood just hours before. They had come to protect a mother and child, and they would not be deterred. The tall agent looked around the cellar, seeing his disadvantage clearly. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and facing people who were willing to die to protect an innocent baby. With professional calculation, he helped his wounded partner to his feet. "This isn't over," he said, his composure finally cracking. "Our employer has a long memory. You can't protect her forever." But as he spoke, Colonel Morrison arrived with his cavalry troop drawn by the sound of gunfire. The federal officer took one look at the scene and began restoring order with military efficiency. "Citizens, stand down." Morrison commanded, his voice carrying the authority of federal law. "This is now a federal matter." The Tong agents found themselves surrounded by professional soldiers, their escape route cut off. For the first time, the tall man's composure cracked completely. "You don't understand," he said desperately. "We have arrangements, agreements with local officials." "I had arrangements," Morrison corrected. "I'm afraid your local partners are no longer in a position to honor them." As the dust settled, Lyle struggled to speak, blood pooling beneath him. "The bank," he gasped. "Williamson, he's got records, everything. Then he was gone, his secrets dying with him in the darkness of the cellar. But his final words had given Morrison the key he needed to unravel the entire network of corruption that had infected Dusty Bend. 3 days later, the morning sun painted Dusty Bend's main street in shades of gold and amber. The town was already transforming as news spread of the corruption that had been exposed. Federal marshals had arrested Mr. Williamson and several other conspirators, seizing documents that revealed the full extent of the trafficking network. Coda sat on the porch of Mrs. Henderson's house where Mei Lin was recovering from the birth. His ribs were bandaged, but the knife wound was healing cleanly. The baby, named Hope as her mother had decided, slept peacefully in a basket beside him. The federal prosecutor says the case against the Tong is solid. Colonel Morrison reported as he joined them on the porch. "Citizens, you've done a great service to justice. That trafficking network had operations across 3 territories." "What about the other girls?" Mei Lin asked, her voice stronger now. "The ones still trapped." "We're working on that, ma'am. The documents we seized from Williamson's bank contained locations and financial records. We'll shut down every operation we can find." Mei Lin nodded, holding Hope closer. "And us, what happens to us?" Morrison's weathered face softened. "You have choices, ma'am. The federal government is offering you and your daughter new identities and relocation to California, where there are established Chinese communities. You'd be safe there." Or, Coda asked, "or you stay here and help us rebuild this town into something better." "Citizens, what happened here proves that ordinary people can stand up to corruption when they work together. You've given this community a chance to start over." As they talked, Jess Brennan appeared at the end of the street. He walked slowly like a man carrying an enormous weight. When he reached the porch, he stopped and looked up at Mei Lin with eyes full of pain and hope. "May I see her?" he asked quietly. Mei Lin hesitated, then nodded. Jess approached carefully and knelt beside the basket where Hope slept. His face softened as he looked at his daughter. "She's beautiful," he whispered, "just like her mother." "What will you do now?" Mei Lin asked. "I don't know," Jess admitted. "I've lost everything, my job, my family, my place in this town. But I want to try to make amends, to be a father to her, if you'll let me." "It won't be easy," Mei Lin said. "People have long memories." "I know, but I have to try, for her sake." As they talked, Coda noticed the changes already visible in the town around them. Chinese workers from the railroad were moving into abandoned buildings, starting businesses, and bringing their families. The rigid racial barriers that had defined Dusty Bend were beginning to crumble. Most remarkably, the Chinese community had proposed a joint venture with the remaining townspeople, a new mining operation in the hills above town, with profits shared equally among all participants, regardless of race. It was an unprecedented arrangement, but the success of their recent cooperation had proven that different peoples could work together for mutual benefit. "There's something else, citizens," Morrison said, consulting his notes. "The territorial governor has asked me to offer Marshal Standing Bear a permanent position with the Federal Marshal Service. First Native American to hold such a rank." It was an honor Coda had never imagined possible. What would that mean? "You'd have authority across the entire territory. Help us clean up other towns like this one, protect people who can't protect themselves. Citizens, you've proven you have the courage and judgment for the job." Coda looked at Mei Lin, then at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her basket. "I'll need to think about it." "Of course, take your time." But their peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of a single horse approaching at a gallop. The rider was a stranger, a weather-beaten man with hard eyes and trail dust on his clothes. "You Marshal Standing Bear?" the stranger asked as he reined in his horse. "I am. What's your business?" "Name's Jake Morrison, no relation to the colonel here. I've been riding hard from San Francisco with a message you need to hear." Coda felt his blood chill. "What message?" "The Tong boss is there. They're not giving up on the girl. Word is they've put a price on her head and yours too, Marshal. $500 for her, $200 for you. Dead or alive. The numbers hit them like a physical blow. $500 was more money than most people saw in a lifetime, enough to bring every desperate criminal and bounty hunter from across the continent. "How long do we have?" Morrison asked grimly. "Maybe a week, maybe less. They're sending professionals this time, not just local muscle, but the best killers money can buy." Mei Lin clutched hope closer to her chest, her face pale with renewed fear. After everything they had survived, the nightmare was starting all over again. "Then we'd better be ready for them," Coda said quietly. But even as he spoke, he could see the fear in Mei Lin's eyes, the way she looked at her baby daughter, and imagined all the ways their fragile happiness could be destroyed. The corrupted network of Sheriff Brennan and Banker Williamson had been eliminated, but the larger criminal organization they had served was still out there, still hungry for revenge. As the sun climbed higher in the desert sky, the people of Dusty Bend began preparing for their greatest test yet. They had learned to stand together against local corruption, but now they would face an enemy with unlimited resources and no moral constraints. The Chinese mining venture had already begun bringing the community together in ways no one had imagined possible. Former enemies worked side by side, sharing knowledge and resources. The success of their cooperation had created something new, a genuinely integrated community, where people were judged by their character rather than their race. Mrs. Henderson had organized the women into a network of mutual protection, ensuring that no mother or child would ever again face danger alone. Abel had established a proper medical clinic training others in basic healing skills. Even the former saloon had been converted into a school where children of all backgrounds learned together. Citizens. Colonel Morrison said, studying the transformation around them, "You've built something remarkable here, something worth defending." "Then we'll defend it," Coda replied. "All of us together." As they spoke, Hope opened her eyes and looked around at the adults surrounding her with that trusting gaze that babies possess. She was too young to understand the dangers gathering against them, but she seemed to sense the love and determination of the people who had pledged to protect her. "She's the future," Mei Lin said softly. "Not just our future, but the future of this whole community. A future where children can grow up free from hatred and fear." Jake Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "That's all very inspiring. But those killers coming from San Francisco don't care about your future. They care about money, and they'll do whatever it takes to collect it. Then they'll find out what happens when you threaten something that matters to people," Coda said with quiet conviction. The desert wind picked up, stirring dust devils in the street and making the new flag that flew over the marshal's office snap in the breeze. It wasn't the territorial flag or the stars and stripes, but something the community had created together, a symbol of their unity and shared purpose. As the day wore on, riders began arriving from the surrounding area. Word of Dusty Bend's transformation had spread, and people were coming to see for themselves what was possible when communities chose cooperation over conflict. Some came to stay, others to learn, but all were welcome. The town was becoming something unprecedented in the American West, a place where Chinese immigrants, Native Americans, Mexican families, and white settlers worked together as equals. It wasn't perfect, and there were still tensions and misunderstandings, but it was a beginning. The professionals coming from San Francisco won't expect this, Morrison observed, watching the diverse crowd working together. They'll expect to find a divided community they can exploit. Instead, they'll face a united front. "How many are coming?" Mei Lin asked. Jake Morrison spat in the dust. "At least a dozen, maybe more. The best money can buy men who've killed for less than what they're being offered for you." "Then we'll have to be better than the best," Coda said simply. As evening approached, the community gathered in the square for a meeting unlike any in the town's history. Representatives from every group, and the Chinese workers, the Mexican families, the remaining white settlers, even the few remaining Native Americans who had drifted into town, came together to discuss their common defense. Citizens. Morrison addressed the crowd. You face a threat that goes beyond any individual. These criminals represent everything you've rejected. The idea that might makes right, that money is more important than justice, that some people matter more than others. The crowd murmured agreement, but Coda could see the fear in their faces. They had courage, but they weren't professional fighters. When the killers arrived, would their unity be enough? I've sent word to the territorial governor, Morrison continued. Federal troops are being dispatched, but they won't arrive for at least a week. Until then, you're on your own. No, Mrs. Henderson said, standing up in the crowd. We're not on our own. We're together, and that makes all the difference. As the meeting continued, plans began to take shape. The Chinese workers contributed their knowledge of fortification and organization. The Mexican families shared their experience with guerrilla tactics. The remaining cowboys offered their skills with weapons and horses. Most importantly, they had something the approaching killers lacked: a reason to fight that went beyond money. They were defending their homes, their families, their future. They were defending the radical idea that people could choose to be better than their worst impulses. As the stars appeared in the desert sky, Hope slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware that her very existence had become a symbol of everything good that was possible in the world, and everything evil that certain people would kill to destroy. The battle for Dusty Bend was about to begin, but they would face it as they had faced everything else together, united by shared values and common purpose. In the distance, a coyote howled its ancient song of survival and wildness. But here in the town square, surrounded by the lights of a community that had chosen hope over fear, the sound no longer spoke of loneliness and exile. Instead, it sang of endurance, of the possibility that even in the harshest places, people could find ways to build something beautiful, and that beauty was worth fighting for no matter the cost. The desert wind carried promises of the storm to come, but it also carried the scent of possibility. The chance that tomorrow could be better than today, if they had the courage to make it so. Hope stirred in her sleep, smiling at some dream only she could see. And in that smile, they glimpsed the future they were fighting for, bright and uncertain and infinitely precious.